press record and Hi, Mary. How
Hello,
are you?
Christina. I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. Hello, Westminster friends. Here we are, Mary, Khosh, and I are having our wonderful interview for the Resident Life Stories. Mary, where are you right now?
I'm in Chautauqua, New York.
Uh-huh.
We came up about 3 weeks ago, and so I've been immersed in Chautauqua, but it's online this summer. So I think people at the shores are doing it too. So I heard from Lynn Farrell yesterday that they're enjoying it also. So it's great.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I have the link too. I haven't had time in my retirement to do this, but oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad to be with you. So how are you? So you said you're in Chautauqua, and how are you doing overall in this
Overall,
time?
we're doing fine because we were also doing fine at Westminster Shores. I couldn't think of a better place to be isolated than at Westminster Shores with the outdoor walkway and the beautiful weather and the birds. And so it was very pleasant, and I painted there and did a lot of things that with Aspect. And so Aspect has continued on online. We're still involved with Aspect up here in Chautauqua.
Yeah.
So everything is online now, so you could be anywhere.
I know that's a silver lining in this cloud, isn't it? That and we can do the Zoom interview or conversation. You being in Chautauqua, I'm being here at my home, so it's wonderful. Mary, I know a little about your life story, and I know how amazing and wonderful it is. Do you want to start with your childhood?
Sure. I was born in Akron, Ohio. My parents were older. My mother was 37 and my dad was 44. And this was in 1942. So in 1942, they were quite old parents. They had been married for 12 years before I was born. And I'm an only child. So I don't think that I was part of the plan. I think I was completely threw them off. And so but I had a wonderful childhood. Even though I was an only child, I had lots of neighborhood friends, and my parents were quite devoted to me. They read to me and played with me, and so I had a very happy childhood. But my parents did tell me all the time that I was growing up that I needed to have abilities to be able to care for myself in case anything ever happened to them. And they did stress that they were the oldest parents on the block, and they were. They were very much like grandparents, I think. For many of my friends, they had grandparents that were about the ages of my parents.
Wow.
So when my friends would be out roller skating and their moms or dads might roller skate with them, my mom and dad would always say, "We're too old for that."
Oh.
So they stressed that I would know what to do for myself, and they also stressed that my Aunt Mary and Aunt Nell lived in Alabama. They were my mother's sisters, and I was named after them. That they would be the ones that I should reach out for if anything happened to my parents. But of course, as a little kid, I had no way of knowing how to do that. And so I made lots of friends in my neighborhood, just hoping that one of them would take me in if anything happened to my parents. So it was a tough way for a child to grow up. Yes. But I did learn a lot from that. I learned how to do most everything for myself. And so my parents were diligent in teaching me how to manage on my own.
Yeah. So. You know, Mary, they had the very, very best intentions, because I'm sure they were concerned, like, really, if anything happens to us, you know.
Yes, they were concerned. And so, especially since I was an only child, I needed to be as resourceful as possible for them to feel comfortable.
Yeah. Wow. And that's probably why you are so amazing, because, you know, sometimes the things in childhood that might have been kind of a hardship help us along in life. Don't you agree?
Well, they always stressed education too. My mother was a second grade teacher, and so they read to me from the time I was very young, and I learned to read when I was very young. I was reading pretty well by the time I went to kindergarten. So when I went to kindergarten, I went to our neighborhood school, but my mother was teaching in an inner city school in Akron. And so she got permission to take me with her because she was always wondering what would happen to me when I would come home from school, since I was home alone and I
Right.
was very young. And so she would have a neighbor look after me until she could get home from school. But it was not successful. She didn't like that, the way that was working out. So she got permission from the school board in Akron to take me with her. And I went to first grade through seventh grade at an inner city school in Akron. My friends were all my classmates, because by the time we would get home from school, it was too dark to play in the neighborhood. So my neighborhood friends were my summer friends and weekend friends, and my
Oh,
school friends were my best friends because I saw them the most.
right.
And the projects were a subsidized housing area that was the feeder for this school. And the projects were right next to the school. So my friends would invite me over for lunch and invite me over to play after school. They had a great playground. I loved the projects.
Oh,
So, so, so we would play together every day in the playground at the projects, or play in the playground behind the school building. But it was great. And I grew up with those kids as my best friends.
yeah.
So it helped me also in life to be more sympathetic, to
Yes.
be more aware of the differences in income and poverty and the levels that hold people back, and how important education is as a boost to people to help them get out of poverty.
Wow, what a great upbringing, Mary. You mentioned that you had your summer friends in the summer because you were. Did you realize, or as a child, did you notice a difference between the kids in the inner city and where you lived, or was that just it was the way it was?
No, as a child, your values are based on what you're good at. And so the kids that were the most popular kids were the ones that could run the fastest, the ones that could climb the highest in the trees, the ones that could catch a ball better than the other kids. So it was never anything that had to do with race or had to do with economic. It was all on skills.
Yeah.
And so since I didn't have good baseball skills or good running skills, I was usually in the outfield, and I could sit down in the outfield. The balls never got that far. So I would just sit in the outfield and pick the clover and daydream out there. And it was just fine. It was just,
Great. Great. Wow, what a great, and what about high school? Was
in
that,
high in high school, actually in junior high, I went to a school that was newly built. In eighth grade, we combined schools. So the school that I had been going to, the inner city school, and my neighborhood school were combined into the junior high. And so in eighth grade and ninth grade, I went to the new junior high, and that was a bused school. It was a regional school. And so the kids from both the elementary school that I had gone to and the neighborhood elementary school were bused to this junior high. So that worked out great for me because I had friends from both areas. So they just all blended together. So that was terrific.
that's great.
And then when I went to high school, it was the same. It was the feeder, but we could walk to the high school. It was closer to us. And so we walked to high school, and it was, again, the feeder and the big school that was the same as our junior high. In high school, I was a really good student. I progressed quickly. We didn't have AP classes, and we didn't have special programs for kids that were moving along quicker. So I graduated from high school when I was 16. We just had to collect the number of credits we needed, and I always had extra ones. And then I was a majorette in high school in my senior year, which was great fun for me. I just relaxed. I had all the credits I needed. I just had great fun, and a new group of kids that I hung out with that were the so-called with it kids instead of the Four Eyes kids, which were the nerdy kids that I had been associated with before. So it was, my senior year was just a blast.
Wonderful.
And then I went to the University of Akron when I was 16 as a freshman.
Wow, you were very young.
I was very young. Yes,
Yeah.
I was very young. And my parents were very protective. So I lived at home and commuted to the University of Akron. But I did have a driver's license because I was 16. And so I drove to the university, and I also did that in 3 years. I graduated from college after 3 years.
Wow. And what was your major? What did you
I,
study?
I was a chemistry major in college. Absolutely love chemistry. I still love chemistry,
Wow.
but you get very behind if you're not within it all the time. So I graduated with a degree in comprehensive science with chemistry major, and then taught chemistry for one term at Barberton High School, but it was mostly babysitting. I really didn't, I didn't enjoy that. And so, and then John and well, let me go back a little bit.
Yeah, we need to know when John came into the picture.
I did a pharmacy internship while I was a junior in college, because my chemistry professor had told me that there were only two of us, two females in the chemistry class, told me that even though I was a good student in chemistry, I would not really have a good career in chemistry, because women in chemistry this was 1950, let's see, I graduated from high school in 1959. This would have been 62 or 63. That women at that time in a field like chemistry were not respected, and they were not really given the best opportunities. And so if I wanted to move on and do something significant with chemistry, I would probably need to go to pharmacy school. So that wasn't in my plan, but I applied to pharmacy school at Ohio State, and I was accepted. And so I did a summer internship in pharmacy. You need to do 2,000 hours in a pharmacy supervised by a pharmacist in order to be able to sit for the pharmacy licensing boards. So I started on my pharmacy internship before I had gone to pharmacy school. I started the summer before I was planning to go to Ohio State. And I did it at the St. Thomas Hospital Pharmacy in Akron. And I was in the pharmacy at St. Thomas was in the basement. So I was down in the basement with all the pipes with Sister Justine, and I'm not Catholic. And so I was not exposed to nuns in my childhood. And this was my first exposure, and she was about 6'2", I thought. Maybe not quite that tall, but that's what I thought. And she was very formidable, had a black habit, and only this much face showed underneath it. And she was pretty stern in all business. And so I did whatever she said. If she told me to do anything, I did it. And so the pharmacy window was like a little wooden door with a buzzer. And so she was standing next to me, and the buzzer went off. So I slid the door open, and it was John on the other side of the door. And he handed me a prescription for a cup of coffee. And he said, "We don't have coffee in the pharmacy." And I slid it back and closed the door because Sister Justine was right next to me. And so he buzzed again, and I opened the window again, and he passed in a real prescription. So I filled the prescription and I handed it back to him. And then he said, "Do you take a coffee break?" And I said, "Yes, sometimes." He said, "Well, will you take a coffee break today in the cafeteria? How about 2:00? And I said, "Okay." So I met him in the cafeteria at 2:00, and we had a nice conversation. And he asked me if I played tennis because they had tennis courts behind the hospital, and I did. So I kept bringing my tennis racket to the hospital when I would go to work in the morning. And so after I did my internship hours, we would go play tennis on the tennis courts. And that's how John and I met.
That's a great, great story.
I still have that prescription for the cup of coffee. I still do. It's in a scrapbook.
That's wonderful. What a great and creative way to meet somebody.
But then I didn't go to pharmacy school because he said, "Why would you do that when you can just finish your degree at the University of Akron and then we can see each other?" And so I thought, well, that was probably a good idea. So I was more interested in him than I was in pharmacy school. So
You weren't interested in that in the first place, right?
no, that was a fallback. Pharmacy was a fallback. So I finished my degree in chemistry, and then he got an internship with a residency. It was actually a internal medicine residency and a pathology residency in Canada. And we needed to go to Canada because he's from Iran,
Yeah.
and he was not going to be able to get his green card or permanent residency on the visa that he had. He had a work visa and a student visa while he was doing his residency. So we went to Canada we were married and went to Canada for the 2 years that he needed to cover that. And while we were there, I took some more science classes at McMaster in Hamilton, but we also had our first 2 children while we were in Canada.
Oh,
And so they're dual citizens. Our
yeah, that's great.
oldest daughter, Sheila, and our second daughter, Deanna, were both born in Canada, which
Wow.
they're very proud of.
I bet.
And their children now are also dual citizens.
Oh.
So we have 4 grandchildren that are Canadian dual citizens.
That's great. That's great. I love Canada, as you know. So where in Canada was it?
This was Hamilton, Ontario.
You said that. Yes, you said that. Sorry. So 2 years you were studying. You also had 2 little kids. So how did you do that, Mary? Did you have help?
No, John's hours were somewhat flexible because he was resident and we lived right by the hospital. And so, and then in the summer, my mother would come up from Akron because we had her only grandchildren. Yes. And so, because she was still teaching, but she had her summers free. And so she would come up and stay with us. And then that's when I would really pour it on and go to McMaster and I took physics there and I took astronomy there, which was really interesting. I enjoyed that.
Wow. And that's a good university, McMaster's, right?
It is.
Yeah, very good. So then you came back to the States, and where did you live?
We came back in 1960, the winter of 1964. And we came back to Akron. And again, because I'm the only child, these were the only grandchildren. Right. And so they were pretty special to my parents. And so we moved fairly close to my mom and dad. And I went on to school again. And I got my master's in counseling psychology at the University of Akron. And did it in the summertime. Just poured on the credits in the summer, and my mom was the babysitter, which my parents loved, and I got to continue on with my education, which they supported. And then we moved. John was ready to start his practice, so we were looking for places that he wanted to settle, and we went to Caribou, Maine. There was an ad in the OBGYN journal that they needed an obstetrician, gynecologist there. So we went up, and we considered it, but it was not a good place to raise children. They didn't really have a good school system, and it was very remote. So most of the people in town that were concerned about education in Caribou sent their children to boarding school in Boston. Oh. We did not want to do that. That was not in the plan. Yeah. So we went back to Ohio, and John thought, well, he would just look around there and see what he could find. And there was an ad by an obstetrician in Berea, Ohio, that was looking for a partner. And so John visited him and talked with him, and he decided that he would try that. So we moved actually to Strongsville, which was a small suburb that was contiguous to Berea. And he started working with this other doctor, but that only lasted about 2 weeks because they kept trying to negotiate what John's role would be. And it was always going to be about 40% of the practice, and the doctor that had hired him was always going to have 60% control. So John would never have really a voice in the practice. He would it would never be 50-50. So John said, well, he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to start out there and get planted and really build up his practice there and then be stuck with only 40%. Yeah. So we started looking for office space, so he would start by himself.
Mhm.
And I was just driving with the girls, and I found a sign up next to a dentist's office in Strongsville that said office available. So
Wow.
I pulled in and went into the dentist's office. The dentist was very excited because he thought I was going to be his new patient,
Oh,
because he was very young and had just started his practice. And so I told him I was really interested in the office space that was attached. So he showed me that. And then I told John about it. So John rented it from the dentist, and John started his practice there, which was in Strongsville, very close to the little house that we had rented. And this dentist and his wife and their families became our closest friends.
oh, wonderful.
So we still vacation with her. He passed away last winter, but they're the reason that we're at Chautauqua, because they had vacationed in Chautauqua and they introduced us to it. So we've been at Chautauqua now. We've had this house in Chautauqua for 40 years.
Oh, wow.
So that's how long our friendship with this dentist and his wife and his family have been. Their children, they have 6 children. Their 6 children are very close to our 4 children. So it's been a long relationship from finding that little office.
Beautiful story. And now, meanwhile, you had 2 more girls, right? 2 more daughters.
And so our 4 girls are all within 5 years of each other.
Oh.
And 3 of them are here at Chautauqua right now. And the other one is in Colorado with her husband and their 4 children. And it was just too long a trip with COVID to try to come here this summer. So they've skipped that.
So you're all together in your house there in Chautauqua?
Yes, we're all here.
Oh, great. That sounds wonderful. So Mary, can you tell us more about your career then? Because chemistry and then psychology. So what did you do?
I got my master's in counseling psychology. I did that because I thought I would go back to graduate school in chemistry, but I was so behind, and chemistry is something that you have to keep up with. You really can't let that lag. And so I was considering what else I wanted to do if it wasn't chemistry. And I was very interested and fascinated by the behaviors of our daughters. Since I had not had any brothers and sisters, I had never been really exposed to little kids. And so watching them grow and what they were doing was just amazing to me. And they were so different. So I was fascinated by that. So when I went back to graduate school, I thought, okay, I'm going to study child psychology. I realized I wasn't interested in child psychology. I was interested in my children, but I wasn't interested in child psychology. I was interested in statistics. I was interested in math. I was interested in research. And so when I went on and got my master's in psychology, I then decided that I wanted to work with adults. I was really much more interested in adult behavior and adult choices, and looking at why they do what they do and how it matters, what the impact is of various behaviors. And so I got an opportunity to work at Baldwin Wallace College. It was a fluke. Our youngest daughter was just starting first grade, and our phone call came from Baldwin Wallace asking if I would interview for a position as a part-time psychologist in their brand new counseling center. And the referral came from my professor at the University of Akron to the head of the counseling department at Baldwin Wallace, because this man that was at the counseling department at BW had graduated a couple of years before me. And he had his PhD from the University of Akron in counseling psychology. And he had the same dissertation advisor that I had had for my master's thesis. So this advisor had recommended me. So they called me and asked if I was interested. And I thought, well, maybe I am, because our children are in school. And I've always wanted to do something with this degree, so this might be it. And Baldwin Wallace was very close to where we lived. At that time, we lived in Berea, and it was about 1.5 miles to the campus. So it was very accessible, easy to get back and forth. And it was a part-time position, so I could pick my hours and I could be home when the girls came home from school.
Wow.
So it worked, it just fell into my lap.
Mm.
And so I went over and interviewed for it, and I took it. And at the time that I took it was at the same time that the International Women's Year and the push for equal rights for women and the vote for women was happening in Cleveland.
Mm.
So, and it was a time when also, it was 1973 was when I started at Baldwin Wallace. The early 70s were the time when women were able to begin looking at other careers. No one would have told a girl in chemistry in 1973 that she didn't have a chance to be able to get a good job. That wouldn't have happened then. And so in just the 10 years that it took for me to graduate and to begin my family was when life for women was beginning to change.
Yeah.
And so I started a program at Baldwin Wallace called Experience Q, and it was it's CUE, career on one side, education on the other, with you, the woman, in the middle.
Oh, wow.
And so it was an 8-week counseling class for 12 women per group to look at options, to look at themselves, to look at their values and their interests and their aspirations, and then how to make those aspirations happen. And so it was very popular. It took off.
Yeah.
And so it became a prototype for other programs for women. It ran at Baldwin Wallace. I ran it for 10 years. It became a program that was sort of a forerunner for other programs that happened all around the country. It was published by the University of Michigan, and it's still in their archives, I suspect. But I did lots of teaching of this program to other schools. Other colleges and universities would invite me to go in and help them set theirs up too. So it became sort of a nationwide movement for women to have opportunities to be able to evaluate themselves and to get some support and some help into launching something new.
Wow, amazing.
And Baldwin Wallace started a program at that time based on this Experience Q program to offer. It was called a certificate program. So if a woman already had a degree in, suppose, education or nursing or secretarial science, they could come back to school and just pick up a new major. So if they wanted to be a biology major, or if they wanted to be an accounting major, or if they wanted to be a math major, or if they wanted to go into engineering, they could go back and just get the core courses, just get the major that they needed, and then they would be prepared with a certificate to go into graduate school with their brand new major. So many, many, many women did that over the 10 years that I was at BW.
Oh my God, that must feel so great, Mary, to know that you were a big part of so many lives, that women finally could do what they wanted to do.
Well, it was the timing. The timing made it possible, and I could identify so easily with that because I was the housewife with 4 little girls who was back in school and was doing something else and was identifying closely with the participants that were coming to these programs. And so it worked out. The timing was just right. Then in 1983, I left Baldwin Wallace and started my own practice. I got my PhD while I was at BW in industrial organizational psychology. I taught some classes in the MBA program at BW, and I also taught lots and lots and lots of executive training workshops. I did those for probably 5 or 6 years. So I made lots of contacts in the business communities around Cleveland area through Baldwin Wallace's executive training programs. So when I started my private practice, I was already pretty well connected into the city. I wrote a weekly article for Crane's Cleveland Business on jobs and careers and skills that are required, interests and values that match the person to a job. If they're working in a job that suits them very well, it doesn't feel like work. If they're doing what they love,
Yes.
it's just a natural extension of who they are.
Yeah.
It makes life so much better. A person spends so many hours at work, and if work is fulfilling and rewarding, it doesn't seem like they're working. They're refreshed when they go home. They're not frustrated. If it's a bad fit, they go home with stress and aches and pains and grumpy attitudes. But if you have a job that suits you well, that doesn't happen. So
I know from personal experience at Westminster Shores, it was not work.
that's why we're going to miss you so much, because you could tell every day that you were in the right job for you. It was a perfect fit.
Thank you. It was great, Mary. But it's wonderful to hear that you helped women, or in general, men afterwards with your practice to find what they're best suited for.
Well, it was a very rewarding career. I absolutely loved my job, and I would have done it for free. It's the same thing, that if you have a job that really suits you well, it doesn't feel like work.
I know. Yeah.
So I worked with lots of organizations and companies in private practice, and I was stretched pretty much all over Ohio. And then some of those companies were international companies, so I got to travel a lot and do lots of workshops and do assessments for potential candidates for their staff and for their executive positions, pretty much all over. And so it was very rewarding. I loved it. One of my clients that was the most interesting, again, also fell in my lap. It was, I worked with the Cleveland Browns for about 5 years as their career coach. They even got me a little chair that said career coach on it, one of those director chairs that had the canvas on the back. So, so it was funny for me, because having 4 daughters and nobody played football, I wondered why they called me for this job, because any male industrial psychologist in Cleveland, most of them were male, would have jumped for that job, and I didn't seek it. They called and said, would you be interested in working with the team and the players as a career coach to help them look at what their lives would be after football, because so many don't plan their life after football. They get injured or something happens or they get cut, and then they're forced to choose something to do, but they don't have any preparation for that and haven't given it any thought. So I asked them, why me? Because I don't know anything about football. And they said, that's exactly why. Because you wouldn't talk to them about the game. You wouldn't talk to them about why they did this or that. You would leave the football coaching to the football coaches, and you would just be the career coach. So it was a great relationship. It worked out really well. And my inner city school, early childhood, really made a difference in that job, because these kids, and they were kids to me, they were the ages of my kids, the Browns players, they had grown up in pretty rough experiences and pretty tough times. And many of them were like my friends had been from the projects. And so I could identify with what their childhood had been like for many of them, because I was aware of that, because I was a child in that environment too. And so it's interesting how things turn around and how they come back to you.
God, I love that, Mary. I love, like I said earlier, your childhood experiences is almost, there's a preparation for what you're doing and what you're passionate about later in life. So it's like hardship can really turn into a blessing and into something that helps you along. It's wonderful. And I bet these young men loved you.
Well, it was very interesting, because this job also, just like my original job at Baldwin Wallace College, just sort of fell into my lap. And I think what I learned from that is that when opportunity comes, even if it's just a little whisper of telling you that this is an opportunity for you, go this way, just listen to it and say yes. Don't debate too long, and don't let it go by. Just jump in and say yes, because both of these experiences, my 10 years at Baldwin Wallace and my 5 years with the Cleveland Browns, were wonderful experiences that I will never forget. And they both came to me. I didn't go to them.
And you know, here again, you thought, oh, I don't know anything about football. Why me? And that was exactly the reason. So sometimes we really don't know what the motivation is, you know, with other people. And so for you, I mean, that always takes a bit of courage too, doesn't it?
Well, it just takes a willingness to try something new. I think courage might be the right word, or it might just be risk taking,
Yeah,
willing to go out on a limb,
yeah,
and having enough confidence to say, okay, well, if I don't make it, if something happens and I fall off of this limb,
yeah,
I'll learn something from it. I
yeah,
may get bruised a bit, but I'll heal.
yeah.
And so
Beautiful.
just go for it.
Beautiful, Mary. So let's come to St. Petersburg. How did you and John decide to move to St. Petersburg first, and what was your reason?
Well, this was also one of those other things that just fell in our lap. We were living in Cleveland, in Strongsville, Ohio. I was reading the Sunday Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is a giant paper, or used to be at least, like the Sunday New York Times, very thick. It takes really a whole day to go through it and make any progress. So it was a cold, dreary Cleveland day, and I had the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and I was reading it all. And there was an article on James Michener that attracted me, and so I was reading about James Michener because I'd read a few of his books and I really admired him. So as I read down through the article, it said he is a member of the Academy of Senior Professionals at Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Wow.
And he is working with college students and teaching English and participating as an Aspect Fellow on the campus. And I thought, oh, what a concept. This is
Yeah.
fabulous. So I showed John, and we both had enjoyed working with college students at BW. We had team taught some classes together when I was there. And so I thought, this is a great way for us to end our careers. And John was close to retirement at that point. I wasn't, but he was. And so I called down to Eckerd College, and the person that answered the phone at Aspect was Dorothy Kalapaka, who has also turned out to be a long-term, excellent, great friend who lives at Westminster Shores now.
Yes.
But Dorothy answered the phone, and I asked her about Aspect, and she explained everything to us. I told her we had never been to St. Petersburg. We had not vacationed in Florida. We vacationed in Chautauqua, New York. We didn't know anything about Florida. And so, but we were interested in this program. And so she arranged for us to come down. She told us which hotel to stay in. And she gave us information about the college, sent a big bundle of stuff. And so we went through it, figured out when we could go, called Dorothy back and told her that we wanted to come. And so we visited for a week, really enjoyed everything about Aspect. We went to every interest group, even the things we weren't interested in. We had a great time. And so we left after that week and decided that we would go back again another time. John was about 2 years away from retirement at that point. So the following year, we went back at another time of year. We thought, if we're going to be serious about this, if we're going to move to St. Petersburg, we need to really know what the climate is like and what the culture is like, and will this work for us? Will this be a fit?
Yeah.
So we visited another time of year, opposite season. We didn't go in the summer because we come to Chautauqua in the summer.
Yes.
So summer wasn't an issue. It was the spring and the fall and the winter. So we tried it out. It was more winter, and it was still wonderful. So we thought, okay, this is an easy decision. When John retires, we're going to move to St. Petersburg. So he retired in 1993. And so we moved down to St. Petersburg. We bought a condominium in Isla del Sol, and we started in with Aspect. And I was there about 3 days. And one of the Aspect members had been on the membership committee. And he said, I saw your credentials when you applied for Aspect membership, and we really need you on this campus somewhere else. We need you in the Leadership Development Institute if you're interested in working again. I said, I've only been down here a couple of weeks, and I really haven't thought about working again. But again, this fell into my lap.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, will you come over and talk to the vice president for special programs, and just explain what you've been doing in Cleveland?
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay. So I did that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Jim Deegan. And after Jim and I talked, Jim said, well, would you be willing to work? Because everything I had been doing in Cleveland with the executives and with the Browns and with all the others with career development and career coaching was exactly what they were doing in the Leadership Development Institute.
Yeah.
They were using the very same instruments I used. They were doing the same kind of evaluations and the feedback sessions, is exactly what I had been doing. So
That's
it
great.
fell into my lap, and I did that for 20 years at Eckerd
wow.
College.
Wow.
So from 73 until 93, and I just retired in 93. So it was also very rewarding. Loved it. 73 to 93, I was in Cleveland. 93 to 2013.
That's what yeah.
2013 is when I retired.
Wow. So it's not that long ago, and you're still connected to Aspect. During that time, could you also take participate in Aspect? Did you have enough time? Yeah.
Oh, yes, because the Leadership Development Institute doesn't meet every week. It's at the time that I was working in it, it was about maybe 20 weeks a year at maximum. And so half of my time was free to do other things. And that's when I started painting and being very involved with Aspect. And I learned to play golf and all those things that I didn't know how to do while I was working all the time. I had enough time then to be able to do Aspect, to play golf, and to paint.
Well, Mary, I've always admired, I've admired you and all your qualities and gifts and what you've done. And I love your paintings, as you know, and I think they're so different too. It's almost like you can see your development in, at one point you were doing all the instrumental paintings, right? Yes. So, but how did you get into painting? What happened there?
Well, I went over, I've always loved art. And whenever we would vacation or go to any city that I was unfamiliar with, I would always head to the art museums, and I would always go to the art galleries. I've always loved art, but I never thought I could do art. And I never tried to do art. But I was, since I had some time, and St. Petersburg is a very arty town.
Yes.
I went over, we were living in Isla del Sol in the condominiums right across from the beach. And the beach has Suntan Art Center, and it was practically walking distance to the condominium that we were in. We could just go over the bridge, and so I stopped into Suntan Art Center to learn more about it and go to their little gallery. And when I did, there was a class going on. It was a watercolor class in one of the other rooms. And so I went into the other room and just stood against the wall and watched the teacher and watched the class, and was I was just enthralled. I just thought, okay, well, maybe I can do art. And so after the class was over, I talked to her to see if she had room in her class or if it was a beginner class. And she said, no, she didn't have room in that class, but she would let me know when she would start a beginner class. So I gave her my information, and she called me. And I joined her newest beginner class, and it just took off from there. I loved it. I loved doing art. I'm convinced that anybody can do art. I really think anybody can learn to do art. If I can do art, anybody can do art.
I believe that because, there's this book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but I did that because I thought I couldn't do art. And then lo and behold, I could. So yeah, if I can do it, everybody can do it. Anybody.
I agree. I think that if with good instruction and persistence and the willingness to flub up and make some real stinkers and then just tear them up or paint over them, anybody can do art. You just learn as you go.
Yeah. Mary, I hear you saying again and again that you have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to be willing to risk something, whether that was in your career choices or whether now you're saying the same thing with art. You just have to risk making mistakes or flopping or however you said it, but that's such a great philosophy in life, that to be able to do that, right?
Well, and when you learn that you can make some mistakes and that nothing really happens, you
Yeah.
just learn from what you did wrong and try something else.
Yeah.
So it's not a disaster to flop on your face. You know, you can just get up and brush yourself off and go on,
Yeah.
do something else.
That's wonderful. And then I also know that you play the ukulele, and that's another wonderful part of your life. So did you start playing an instrument later in life?
No, I learned to play the piano as a child.
Okay.
That was one of the parts of my education that my mother was insistent on. And so I learned to play the piano when I was 5, and I had piano lessons all my childhood and all my high school years. I played with the orchestra in high school. I accompanied the choirs in high school. And then when I went to college, even though I was a chemistry major, I continued in the music department and took piano and organ. And then I played the organ for the Methodist Church in Akron, Ohio, for their weddings and their funerals and sometimes their services. So they called on me now and then to do that, which I loved. I really enjoyed doing that. So music had been part of my life, but not as a career, just as a part of my life, something that I thoroughly enjoyed. But I heard a couple of people at a talent show at the Shores playing the ukulele, and it looked like so much fun. And I thought, well, maybe this is something that I could learn to do, and maybe other people here would be interested in it too. So I just went on the computer and looked for a ukulele. I bought one from Amazon. And I went to the ukulele meetup at the public library in St. Petersburg by myself, and went up to the front of the room and told the instructor that was up there that I was brand new. I didn't know anything about my ukulele, but I had gone on YouTube. I knew which strings were which, and I knew a little bit about the chords, but I had totally self-taught. And so I was there to just try to learn as much as I could. So she put me at a front table and set me next to someone that knew what they were doing. And because I didn't even have the music. And so I shared the music with the person that she sat me with, learned a little bit, flubbed a lot. And when we were done, I said to her, it was Leslie Green, would she be interested in coming out to Westminster Shores if there would be enough people that had interest that wanted to learn to play the ukulele, because it was such fun. It was easy. The chords are all presented to you by every music note. So it's something that even children can learn this in preschool. It's that easy and that much fun, and you can sing with it, and it's just it's joyous.
Yeah.
So it's happy music. So this happened. Leslie Green was willing to come to the Shores, and right now she's still leading us with ukulele on Zoom.
Oh, wow.
So this is happening. She does it twice a month. On Thursday afternoons, we have it this Thursday. So I'll do it from here in Chautauqua with the Zoom group on the ukulele from the Shores.
Oh my God.
So we've become the Shore Strummers. And so
and you're wonderful. You've performed several times, as I remember. Yes.
Yes.
And Mary, it's one of the things I've learned is, like, if you want to keep your brain going, you know, really stretch, it's either learning a new instrument or a new language. So that's wonderful from that perspective. Yeah.
Well, and we'd love to have more Shore Strummers join us too. So Leslie Green is coming to teach anyone that wants to learn, and the rest of us are very eager to have newcomers join the Shore Strummers.
Wonderful, wonderful. Mary, we skipped one part in your life story. How did you get to the Shores? What was the process there?
Well, again, Dorothy Kalapaka comes into our life there again.
Oh, wow.
Because she and Henry moved to the Shores about 7 years before we were ready to begin to look. And we, with other good friends from Aspect, had started to shop around the state of Florida looking for retirement communities that we thought we would be able to move to with an easy transition.
Yeah.
And so when Westminster started to build their new building, Dorothy let us know. that something new was happening. And so we visited Bahama Place and pre-construction. It was a hard hat visit, so we were able to crawl through the building, and it wasn't finished, just the outside walls were up, but we still had to wear hard hats. And our floor, the floor that we live on, was kind of roughed in, but we could see the size of the rooms, and so we walked through it. And when we left, after, because we had visited for a few years other places around Florida, and so after we left, John and I talked about it. We decided that if this was our best shot, that of all the places that we had seen, we would have had to move from St. Petersburg. And we loved St. Pete, and we were connected in St. Pete by then. And we really didn't want to give up what we had already created, the relationship with Eckerd College and the activities at Aspect, and also with the art community that I was involved with in St. Pete, and also with the golf group that I was playing with. And John too. John was very deeply entrenched in St. Petersburg through the health committee. And he was going to St. Anthony's and Bayfront for all their Grand Rounds meetings. So we were really contented in St. Pete and didn't necessarily want to uproot. So this was a great way to stay where we are and to be in a brand new retirement community that had a future, because we could see from the chart on the wall that they were planning on building more, and that it was going to be, this was the start of what was going to be their future. And it was the start of what was going to be our future. So we put our deposit down. It was about 2 years before the building was ready to be occupied after we paid our deposit. So we were among the first to move in to the new Westminster Shores. And so it was in 2010 that we moved.
Wow. And so, wow, Mary, that you've already been there for 10 years. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yes.
So, I mean, St. Pete really has become home for you and John.
Yes, because we've been here since 1993. So yes, we've been there 27 years. Yes, it has become home.
And your kids love to come and visit, I imagine?
Yes, they do. And also at Chautauqua. So we really are in the best of both worlds, because our kids can all come to Chautauqua because it's summer break for our grandkids. So the cousins can all be together and play, and we see them all in the summer. And then when they have time in the winter, it gives them a break away from the cold weather and the wind and the storms that they experience in all their homes. Everyone's a northerner or a westerner.
So Mary, I have one more question that I really, it's kind of burning on my heart. And that is, you know, with all your success and when your life philosophy and taking risks, how did your daughters do? I can only imagine, and grandkids, that they're all very successful.
Well, they've all done really well. All 4 of our daughters are married. All 4 of our daughters have master's degrees. All 4 of their husbands do. Our grandchildren, our oldest grandson was just married last September. He has a master's in material science from Northwestern, and his bride is from Siberia. And she just finished her master's at the University of Chicago just in May. And so she's going to be working for Boston Consulting Group, and Danny works for Boeing, and they're in Chicago. Then our next grandson has a master's in chemical engineering from Northwestern, and his fiance, their wedding was canceled it was going to be May 9th because of the virus. So they're going to get married next March, but she's from China. So we have a Siberian granddaughter-in-law. We will have a Chinese granddaughter-in-law.
Wonderful.
Then our next grandchild works for Oracle. She got her degree from SMU a year ago. But all of them are either in college or are done. Our next granddaughter is in medical school. She's in her 4th year of medical school at the University of Miami in Miami, Florida, and she wants to be an orthopedic surgeon. So they're all doing really well. They go down to age 10. So we have that range, but the ones that are launched have launched very well. And the others are coming along.
Wow.
So It's been great.
That is great. And I just love your story and the philosophy of taking risks. I am taking this away with me, you know, being retired. I'm not sure I am retired and staying retired, but there's still things I want to do. So taking a risk will stay with me. Mary, I so enjoyed being with you. This is wonderful. Is there anything that you would like to tell our residents or tell your kids, because this will be a wonderful gift to your kids, I imagine, to have this life story with you. Anything you'd like to share that we haven't touched on?
Well, I think the main thing that I've tried to do all the time is to keep a positive attitude. If you are bumping up against unforeseen experiences or consequences, just think through and figure it out and look for the positives that can be visible there. There are always something. There's always some way, somehow, to be able to turn it into a more fulfilling and happier experience.
Yes. Oh, with that, Mary, I think those words, I really thank you. And I'm doing this because Dr. Porter always goes, namaste.
Yes, he does.
So he kind of like taught me to do that all the time. So, but I like it. It's wonderful. Mary, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bettina, very much. We're going to miss you very much. I hope you continue to stay in our lives.
Mary, I will, I promise. I came to Westminster to visit before I even started working there, and I will continue. As soon as I can, I will be back and visit.
Great.
That's on my heart. I have to do it for myself, not just for you all.
Good, good. We'll benefit from that.
Great. Bye.